Okay, hi Cedric. First question, is Cedric pronounced right?
Yes, that's Cedric. You got it. The actual French pronunciation is a bit hard for a non-French to get right. It would be Cedric, but Cedric is fine. It's not Cedric.
Okay, Cedric. And is it French?
Yes, it is French. I'm French. I was living in France until the age of 28, so I spent the first 28 years of my life in France, and I've been in the US for a little bit over 20 years now.
Okay, so now the most important question, what was your first computer?
My first computer, well, it depends what you call a computer. I had some pocket computer before that, but the first real computer would be an Apple II, which, we got in our house, I don't know, maybe around 79, so I was 10 years old or so. It was really my first love and what really opened me to both video games and also coding.
Okay.
I became immediately completely fascinated with this machine. And as a matter of fact, just recently, in the past few months, starting this summer, I ended up writing an Apple II emulator just to have some fun with it and to understand it even better than I already did. It was a fascinating project. It was great for me to dive back into my old-fashioned and all these memories that I have with the Apple II growing up.
Okay, so what was first, gaming or programming on your Apple II?
I am not quite sure. Probably gaming, because at the time I had no idea about programming. I didn't know anything. I was 11 years old or something like that. So I'm sure I started by launching a lot of games, which I had already seen at some of my friends or in computer stores, and I was very, very envious. There was a lot of arcade back then, and suddenly it felt like you could have arcade games inside your house on your own screen, and you wouldn't have to pay for them. So I'm pretty sure I started pretty heavily on games, but I got interested in writing programs myself, I think, pretty quickly. And since then, it's been constantly a mix of me. I have phases where I feel like gaming a lot and I have phases where I feel like coding a lot.
Oh, still gaming. So,
oh yeah, I'm still gaming today. Absolutely.
That's interesting, because if I really learned programming, I absolutely lost interest in gaming. So I was like, this programming took over in my case.
Yeah, that never happened for me. I thought that one of those would happen, right? Either after a while, and as I grow old, I would lose interest in programming, or my brain would no longer be able to do this and focus on other things. That never happened. And also video games. I've always been playing video games for the past 40 years, and I still do today. And I was doing just a little bit this morning before starting work. So it's still very much a thing in my life.
Okay. So then, back then, why you started programming? So you could, game all the time. So... And then what was your first program, or how you start that? So what you did with it?
It's really hard to remember what was the spark. I think I just had curiosity to understand how things work in general. And I had tried this with different things, but for some reason, software ended up hitting the right spot. I think my brain was wired the right way to investigate these things. And as you may remember, back then, we didn't have the internet, but we've had very, very little documentation, very little resources. Yeah. You could buy a few books here and there. Some of them were translated in French, a lot were in English. My English wasn't that great then. So I just had to figure out a lot of things by myself. And I think part of the fun was that just reverse engineer and figure out how things work has always been a very strong driving factor in my life and my curiosity. So I think it started this way. I was wondering, how do they display text? How do they display graphics? How do they make sounds? And I just started poking around, no pun intended, and trying to figure out how these things work.
So, funny fact. So my first machine was ZX Spectrum, but with a French manual. And the problem is I have no idea about French, so it was worthless. I could only understand somehow the basic code, but the French explanation was, I only know bien because of my name, but nothing else,
Yeah, the Spectrum and the ZX or ZX80 or 80 and 81 were just before Spectrum. Spectrum was the one after that.
I have one after that. Mine was 128K Amstrad. Yeah. So this was actually no more Spectrum, I guess.
Okay, Spectrum was 16K, right?
Yeah, and Amstrad had two modes, 48K or 128K, so I could switch between both modes.
Okay. Yeah, at the time, all these computers were all legit, right? So there was no dominant computer, and all of them had different games. They were ported, or sometimes they were exclusive, and you saw games on the C64, for example, that were not on the Apple II. That was very, very difficult to stomach. It was a very, very different world back then.
But I think C64 was dominant, right? It was.
Yeah, so the C64 ended up dominating with Apple II close behind, I think, because the Apple II was more expensive than C64. Okay. But they both had 6502, so porting was not too hard, and usually they ended up having the same games and the same applications ported to both.
So what I saw in my world was Atari 800 XL. So for and then the ZX Spectrum, of course, and C64. I never saw Apple back then, I have to admit. Okay, interesting. So, what was your first, application you wrote, and in which programming language? So, you remember the programming language you used?
Yeah, it was BASIC. No, of course, at the time there was pretty much only BASIC. I switched to assembly pretty quickly, 6502.
What was quickly?
Today,
was 12 or what?
Yeah, well, you quickly realize that even though the basic AppleSoft was pretty powerful, there are still so many things that you cannot do. First of all, in BASIC, and second, it was just very slow. I remember starting writing a few games, of course, or displaying graphics and things like that, and you could literally see the pixels being drawn one by one.
Okay.
And I started looking for a better approaches to this. So I fell into 6502 pretty quickly, and I'm still fairly fluent in 6502 today. First because I wrote this emulator, as I said, in the past few months, so it's refreshed my memory, but it's never left me really. I've always been able to understand, to read and write 6502. I've always been interested in the way that the games were protected against piracy, against copy back then. I tried to crack a few games back in the days. I didn't have enough knowledge, and now I have a lot more knowledge, and I'm able to crack Apple II games just for fun, which is another amazing container of ingenuity. I don't know, the way people were protecting disks by using all the intricacies of the way the Apple II works was absolutely incredible. And so trying to reverse engineer and disassemble these is really, really interesting to me. Still is today. It's a weird interest that I have.
Interesting. So we will come back to this, but I'm interested in now your progression. So presumably, as was 12 or 13, you started with assembly, right?
Yeah.
Just to hack games or write your own games, or what was your motivation back then?
Yeah, I think the games were really the only thing I knew. Really, there were a few productivity applications that myself or my dad were using for Apple Writer, a text editor or financial applications. But I really had no interest. I actually no knowledge. I was 13 years old at the time. I had no idea how to write this. But a video game, yeah, I knew what I wanted at least. Getting there, of course, was extremely complicated. Writing games on the Apple II is really not easy at all. So I struggled a lot. I don't think I ever ended up writing a full game, but I started writing quite a few games. And also with some of my friends that I was in school with. They were also interested in that, so we were trying to do this together. But yes, the video games were really the main factor, because at the time when you're a kid, that's really all you know, and you know what you want.
So, and what happens then? So, I mean, one point of time, you hit a wall with your game skills, so you started to learn a different programming language, or what was the next step?
On the Apple II, you didn't really have a lot of choice. It was really AppleSoft or 6502. Pascal came up, the Pascal UCSD, which was a very interesting new system based on bytecode, which is another concept that I started learning then. And as it turns out, I was also studying Pascal in school a bit. Oh, no, that was later. That was university. That was college. So I tried to do some Pascal, but on the Apple II, that was it. These were pretty much the only languages you had access to. So either you did that or you played games.
So were you a true hacker? So you spent all the time with computer, or was it just, I don't know, half an hour a day, or what? How I can imagine that?
I was spending quite a few hours. I almost flunked some of my high school grades because of computers, because I was playing too much. But thankfully, I was able to pass just borderline. So I got my high school diploma and then went to university where computers kept dominating my time.
Was it computer science?
I'm sorry?
Was it computer science?
So no, I started college with mathematics. My minor is in mathematics.
Wow. Why that?
Well, I didn't really have a choice. There was no real computer science program at the time when I started. But I was lucky that as I was transitioning from undergrad and I'm trying to map the French diploma to the American ones for the audience. But when I was about to transition from undergrad to grad, then a CS program was creating in the university I was at, and actually missed the registration. And that was one of my, sometimes in your life you have these pivotal moments where you don't really know, but something happens and your life takes a radically different path. And I vividly remember it was at the end of the summer. I was about to start my graduate mathematics, so master's in mathematics. I went to see a movie with a friend, and that friend, we were catching up. We had just spent summer away from each other, so we're catching up. I asked him, so what did you sign up for? He said, I signed up for computer science. I said, what? We have computer science? Yes, we do, but the registrations were 3 months ago, and it's over now. So I was completely heartbroken. But I still gave it a shot. So the next morning, first hour in the morning, I went to the computer department. I registered. I signed up, but of course, it was too late. But by luck, I ended up being accepted. I'm not quite sure why. And at that point, my life changed, right? Suddenly, I was doing math, and I was not very good at math. It was not my thing. But suddenly, I went from studying things that I wasn't really a fan of to being in a domain that had already been immersed in for the past 5 or 6 years of my life. So I was ecstatic. I ended up doing from 10% computer studying to 90% computer studying at school, which was fantastic. The first years were pretty easy. I was way ahead of everybody else because a lot of the people who were starting there had no knowledge at all of computers. So it was easy. But after a couple of years, I started studying a lot more formal and theory and all that. And so I started learning a lot more things. I was really lucky. This is where my life took a turn for the better.
Yeah, perfect. And what you did aside, so aside of school, so in your leisure, was it some activities or you just learned at school? So
you mean the topics?
Yeah, well, you programmed some just for fun, in your leisure, or you just was fully, immersed in your university?
Yeah, I was still doing both. So I was still writing a lot of code for school this time, but I was still doing a lot in my spare time. And for school, we were writing the standard projects, writing compiler and things like that, and studying the formalism between parsing, grammars, and things like that. A lot of numeric also, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was all code, and I ended up also helping the administration. So they had, of course, a computer science administration people who are the root, right? People who were the admins on Unix and all that. And I ended up doing a lot of research there and figuring things out by myself. And I helped them, and they ended up hiring me to help them. Just because they also were figuring a lot of things out. And back then, the internet wasn't quite at the school, but we're trying to bring the internet into the school. And I had figured out a lot of things on how to do this already. So I helped get the internet into my college, which was also super interesting. But yeah, they ended up hiring me. They ended up even paying me, which said, I don't mind doing this for free. I get to be a root on all the machines, and I get to explore and do things. And I said, no, come on, we need to pay you for your time. So I ended up doing a half-time work there while I was doing my studies, which was also super interesting to me.
So it sounds like paradise, right?
Absolutely. I was in heaven. These years in college were absolutely fantastic. I have no complaints.
And in your leisure at home, what do you program? Were you still interested in games or something else?
So then I switched from the Apple II to an Amiga, which also was a big part in my life.
500? Amiga 500?
I started with the 1000. It was the very first one. The one when you had to insert the kickstart. And then, no, I never, actually, I did get a 500 and also got a 2000. So over a period of, 7 or 8 years, I went from 1500 to 2000. So by then, my horizons had widened a little bit. I had a little bit more knowledge. And I think I ended up writing, a financial bank account app to maintain my finances and things like that. I was still trying to write games. I was trying to write demos also. The demo scene was a big thing. For those who are too young who are listening, they were a way to push the graphics of the computer to the extreme and show some pretty interesting visual and graphic and sound effects, pushing all the processors to the limit. And the Amiga had a very interesting architecture. It was using 3 co-processors to help with the music, the sound, and the graphics. So it was also a lot more complicated. It was a 68,000, which is also a very, very powerful processor back then, 16-bit also. So it was a different kind of assembly. But I dabbled in 68,000 as well then.
Okay, so interesting. So, and what happened after the university? Were you immediately hired, or?
No, after university, I started on an engineering track, and then I changed my mind. I decided I wanted to do a PhD. So I ended up going for a PhD. I did my PhD in about 2.5 years, 3 years, from 92 to 95. I defended it in 95, and then I started working in the real world.
What was the topic of your PhD?
The topic of my PhD, so that was from 92 to 95, just when the internet was just around the corner, and we had Mosaic and all that. And my PhD was about studying what would be the impact of having remote applications on their user interface.
Wow.
So, until then, applications were very monolithic. You install an app and you have a big executable. And at the time, the web was just around the corner, and we started seeing at least the concept. We didn't have single page app or anything like that, nowhere near that. But there were a few pioneers who were envisioning, maybe at some point we'll be using applications on the web, or maybe we'll have an application and it will run on multiple computers at the same time. They will communicate with each other. So I was very interested in that, and I tried to study how these applications would be architected. And I also was very strongly interested in user interface in general. And so I wanted to see if there would be an impact on the user experience and user interface if these applications are distributed or not.
And were you right back then? Were your prediction right? So have you chance, to reread your PhD right now?
I would have to read it. I still have it. It's a thesis of 150 pages in French. I don't think I made any predictions, so I don't know. I cannot tell whether I was right or wrong. But I explored a few concepts which became pretty important in the years that followed. Things like message buses and how to create applications that exchange messages across the network. And how they can orchestrate this kind of thing. So again, it was a good topic for exploration for me. I love the team that I was in. It never really felt like work, to be honest. Again, like you said, it was paradise. I was going to do every day something that I loved. I was even getting paid for it. So it was really, really a very good time.
Okay, perfect. And what happens after your PhD?
After my PhD, I started working. So I worked for a French company for a couple of years. I was doing a lot of heavy C++ in the Corba area. So I was doing distributed computing. At the time, Corba was very hot. C++ was very hot. I was also a part of the C++ committee. So I was involved in the language and attending the meetings and talking about features and things like that.
So you know Bjaerne Stroustroup?
I've met him. I've shook his hand. I've been in meetings with him. I've talked to him a few times. Amazing guy. He was not the only amazing guy. There were a lot of amazing people during these conferences. I felt like a very, very unworthy and very young, like an intern, just sitting in the back of the room and listening to very smart people talk about C++. But yeah, I learned tons of things.
I really liked his book, this C++ book from Edison Wesley, the thick one by him. Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote a bunch. The one that I liked the most about him was the design and evolution of C++, in which it wasn't just a reference book where he explained C++, but he explained how the features in C++ came to be.
Okay.
And to me, that was a very interesting insight on how the committee designed the language. And I gained a lot more respect also on how things are done. I know C++ has a pretty bad reputation even today for being a very complicated language, which it is. But I also have a lot of respect for how they were able to pull this off with the incredible constraints that they had. They had to be not just backward compatible with C, but also please tens, if not hundreds of companies that all have an interest in C++ and trying to design features that get the agreement of everyone. And that, anyway, the whole process was very interesting to me. And again, I get a lot of respect for Stroustroup in the way he was designing and thinking about features and trying to think about ways that they can interact that are negative, that are not sometimes foreseen by the people who offer these features, which is something that even today I still use. When I helped also drive some of the Kotlin language, and when I was working on Android, we're receiving also a lot of features coming from Android users or pull requests, and they were offering new features which seemed good on the face of them. But then as you dig a little bit deeper and you start thinking all the ramifications of these features, you end up saying, I'm sorry, this is not possible. We just cannot merge this, which causes a lot of irritation on the person who commits. Say, what do you mean? It's a great feature. Everybody loves it. And sometimes you can explain, sometimes you can't. But it's never easy to add features to a language. So I gained a lot of understanding on how hard it is to design a language or an operating system or a product when it's already so popular that you have to keep everyone happy.
Yeah, this reminds me, back then I had the idea how to improve EJBs, and I went to a conference to Marina Vatkina. She was the expert group member, and told her, look, if you would change this to this, then it will be better. So yes, but you will break this and this and this in this cases, and this is why that doesn't work. Okay, thank you. I will have to rethink it again. So this was, very short conversation, but she knew exactly, what will happen if this feature will be implemented and what it will break, right?
Yeah. I saw that plenty of times. Also, I was involved in some of the JSRs that define the Java language, the generics and the annotations and things like that. And same thing, we worked under similar sets of constraints where we were trying to add annotation to the language. And we had a lot of very interesting suggestions coming from the crowd. There was a lot of attention, obviously, from the community. Where the annotations were really, really wanted very, very hard. And we had to make some very, very tough decisions. And then later try to explain and defend themselves. And even after you defend themselves, sometimes the people who offer the suggestions still don't understand or they don't have the full picture. So it's a very interesting exercise.
Yeah. After your work with C++ and Corba, the next job was Java or still C++?
Yes, the next job was Java. So I started using Java maybe around 96, 97. And
Uh-huh.
this is when I moved to the US. So I was hired by Sun, of all
Oh,
companies. So, of
really?
course, it was
Didn't
going
knew
to be
that.
in Java.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I joined Sun in 98 and I moved to the US in 98. Sun Labs, to be precise. So more on the R&D side of Sun.
How you joined Sun? Also, you applied, or what was the story behind?
I was a bit lucky. The person that I did my PhD with, the guy that I spent 3 years sharing an office with, ended up joining Sun 6 months before me. He finished his PhD 6 months before me, and then he just referred me.
Okay.
And it was 98. Back then it was very easy to get sponsorship for a visa and relocation and all that. It was the .com boom.
Okay.
So I took a few interviews over the phone, which were very, very nerve-wracking because it was my dream. I had always wanted and dreamed about moving to the US and working there. So I knew this was another pivotal moment in my life where I had a chance to move to the US. So I will always remember this. It was for me, it was 3 o'clock in the morning when I got that call because they were in Pacific time, of course. And it was two people. It was one Irish and one Indian woman. And so I had a very strong Irish accent over the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning, coupled with questions from with an Indian accent coming over the phone. It was absolutely nerve-wracking for me. It spent an hour. I think I did well, but by the time I hang up, it was 4 o'clock in the morning. I just couldn't sleep. I was a mess. I was sweaty. I was trembling, and I was hoping that I did well. But it was very, very probably the hardest interview I've ever had in my life. But looks like I passed. So they made me an offer, and of course, a few months later, I put my resignation to the French company, and a few months later, I moved to the US.
How long you had to wait until the confirmation from Sun?
It was pretty quick, I think. Yeah, just a few weeks, 2-3 weeks. And then I just had to wait for my visa, which took 4 months. So I basically took 4 months of vacation. The French company I was working for was not very happy with me leaving. And when I told them, they were all unhappy, including the CEO who had hired me personally. He was very angry with me. And so they forced me to do the 3-month notice in France, and I think in Germany and a lot of other European companies. When you quit, you have to give usually a 3-month notice, and usually you can negotiate it to maybe 2 months. They're going to force you to do 2 months, and then you can leave. But they told me, no, you're going to do the 3 months, and as a kind of a punishment, I think.
Yeah.
And to me, it was, well, all right, fine, I don't mind because I need to wait anyway for the visa. So I kept working normally for the first 2 months, and then the last month I just hang out and did nothing. And I don't understand why they were being so bitter about it. And even my former team, they were really angry. And I was a young 28-year-old who had been offered a job at Sun to move to the US. And of course, I'm going to take it.
Yeah.
Why is it so hard to understand? So it was a bit sad by that. But, I turned the page and I moved to the US, and a new chapter opened for me.
And the company is still around?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
they
were public then. They're still around. They're still, I think, doing well.
Okay. Okay. So, and then what you did at Sun Labs, you mentioned.
Yes. Sun Labs, so we were working on some kind of smart answering machine that was completely programmed in Java and was able to unify your email, your voicemail, your text messages, because we had some text messages then. It was the 99, 2000. So it was a pretty ambitious thing, which was way, way ahead of its time. And Java was not there. Java was way too slow to do this kind of Java on an embedded device. So that project ended up being canceled about maybe a year after I left, to the surprise of nobody really. And myself, I had started realizing
what was the code name? It's always interesting, This is always fun. Persona, okay.
Persona was the code name. I always remember that because and the team again was fantastic. So of course I had my former colleague, the guy that I did my PhD with, so we already knew each other. But I also met plenty of very, very bright guys on that team, and we're having a lot of fun. We're hanging out and doing a lot of things together.
But did it actually work? Did it work somehow? I mean, at least a prototype.
Yeah, it worked. Yeah, we had multiple prototypes, and we had industrial design, and we had several shapes and boxes and spheres and stuff like that. We tried multiple things, and we had a team that was crossing across everything. Right? We had software, we had backend, we had front end, we had hardware design, we had hardware and industrial design, UI designer as well. Mm-hmm. All of these put together. So it was a pretty complicated product to put together, but we had multiple prototypes that were running in our homes. I don't think it went any further than that. Mm-hmm. But we did have something running, but it was just very slow, and there was really no demand for this. But it's Sun Labs, it's R&D, so it doesn't necessarily need to have a market. We're just exploring things, so it was okay.
Yeah, it sounds to me like the personal assistant right now, like the Apple one or Google or Microsoft.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
And then you left Sun, or you worked for?
Yeah. So what I realized during this year is that ironically, Sun is not a great place to write Java code.
Okay.
Because Sun is a hardware company, and they really, really drill down that message in all Sun employees. Right? Hardware is what makes the money, and we've always been looked at as a department that is losing money because we're writing software. We're not doing hardware. Well, we're doing a little bit of hardware, but we're not selling hardware, Sun hardware. So we were a lost lead, basically, just losing money to do some R&D. And so as a consequence of this, Sun was not very good at writing Java. At the time, JavaSoft has already kind of imploded. JavaSoft was very active during 95, 98, 99, but around that time, all the people in JavaSoft scattered and went to create a lot of other startups that were Java-based, but they had all left Sun. So a lot of the expertise of writing good Java code was gone, and the emphasis of Sun was not on writing Java code. It was to sell hardware. So I realized that, and I thought I need to find a company that is really, really into software and that takes software seriously. And ideally, I want them to be in Java, of course. So I started looking around, and at the time I was very interested in application servers and in particular EJBs. So I had kind of narrowed my choices to companies that were selling application servers, and at the time there were quite a few of them.
Do you remember the names? So there were lots of them. I try to remember. This was like the Tengar WebLogic, of course. Then there was the Orion server, right, from Sweden still, which became the Oracle application server. Then was
that's right.
Top tier persistence. Persistence power tier.
The one I ended up signing up with was Imprise. So they were doing the Borland, right? They were doing the Imprise server. And I was very, very starstruck with Imprise because they had all these book authors, very famous book authors that have written a lot about Corba and things like that. So I signed with them. And then another very pivotal moment in my life happened, which is I went to a party in San Francisco, ended up talking with someone and asked me what I do. I said, well, I just signed with Imprise. Said, oh, really? Well, I work for this little startup called WebLogic. And since you signed up with an application server, we do application server too. Why don't you come and interview with us? I had just met the guy, but this is how it went back then in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. This is how things went. So I told him, but I've already signed and I'm starting in 2 weeks. I said, well, what's the harm? Just come and interview with us. I said, all right, fine. So I went to interview with them, with WebLogic, and I went through an entire day, 8 interviews back to back of writing code, talking to engineers, and being asked some pretty tricky questions. I ended up in the day completely wiped again. My brain completely fried. I was sitting on the train, and suddenly it dawned on me that I think these guys have the fire. They know what they're doing. They're passionate. And if every single employee that I would be working with are like the guys who just interviewed me, and girls also, there were so few women, sorry, this is where I want to be. And so I, over that train ride for an hour, by the time I got home, I realized I'm going to go with WebLogic, and I'm going to have to tell Imprise that I'm not coming. So I made that decision. It was difficult, but I ended up joining WebLogic, and I spent the next 4 years there, which was also a fantastic software growth for me. I learned tons of things. I ended up being around extremely smart people. I was not disappointed in that. And working on really cool tech. And the WebLogic application servers and EJBs and all these things were really, really hot at the time. And they were solving a lot of very interesting problems.
Did you like Java, actually? Because you spent lots of time with C++. What was your reaction to Java? Because at the beginning, if I saw Java, what I really missed were the header files. It's like, this is it. What I'm missing. There is no clean separation between the headers and the implementation. And the multiple inheritance is also what I missed. And, the explanation that the interfaces make up with, I know this is not a real explanation. This is interface inheritance and not a real inheritance. What was your reaction to Java?
Pretty much exactly the same. The very first time I saw Java, I was seeing all this code in line, right? You write the function, you write the code, write the function, write the code, write the function. I'm thinking, that's crazy. We need to have some headers that just show the prototype of the function. And so I really didn't like it at all, but I was won over very quickly. The thing is that I was coming out of 6 or 7 years of really struggling with C++, and it was really a struggle to get C++ to compile. At the time, there was G++, there was Visual Studio, and that was it. Templates were an absolute mess in C++, and we're using a lot of templates. Compiling and linking was taking forever. Debugging, GDB, and all that were really, really difficult. So I was kind of initially in the proverbial frog that gets slowly boiled little by little and doesn't realize it. But it was C++, it was my environment, it was this the way it's meant to be, and that's how it is, period. And then Java came about, and suddenly I started seeing my code becoming a lot clearer, a lot cleaner, no longer of these weird pointer / arrow, star, things like that. It's all very clean, it's garbage collected, we don't need to free, to malloc, and all these things. So I was won over pretty quickly, and it was a breath of fresh air to me, seeing Java. It was, all right, this is where I want to be. This is my next evolution.
Okay.
But the only problem is that it was very slow, very, very slow. So I wasn't quite sure if it was going to succeed.
Yeah. Okay. And at WebLogic company, what you did then? So what was actually your task?
I joined the EJB team, and I implemented a bunch of things in the EJB land, message-driven beans, and I helped with the container, with CMP and BMP, so container managed persistence and beans managed persistence, things like that. And I ended up touching in other areas as well, the load balancing, clustering, and things like that. So there was no shortage of interesting things to work on.
How many developers worked on the EJB container, for instance? You remember that?
The team was not very big. We were less than 10 people.
Yeah.
Right? Probably 7 or 8 people, I think.
Why I'm asking, so what's my observation is actually all, the great or somehow popular things were created by small teams, right? Mm-hmm. So there is I think there is no example in computer where, a huge teams achieve something nice or interesting, right?
I was wondering. Well, it always starts this way, right? The question is,
of course,
can they maintain the quality of the product? I would think, an operating system like Windows at some point, it quickly went over just 10 people writing it. And they have to maintain quality. But no, I hear your point. A lot of the great products start with very small teams that are extremely effective and that are just filling a hole in a demand. And so they're plowing through this very, very quickly, and they release very quickly brand new features that are adopted right away. That's pretty much always how it starts. I agree.
Mm-hmm. But you also wrote EJBDoclet, right?
Yeah, so that goes way back. So at the time, developing EJB applications required writing a lot of XML. Mm-hmm. You had to have these XML descriptors, and these XML files contain a lot of references to your Java code.
Exactly.
And so it was very easy to get these going out of sync, right? If you rename a Java method, but you're referencing that Java method in your XML file, then suddenly things break, and there is no good way to do this. So this is where I started thinking that whenever we need to configure something that needs to refer into the code, then maybe that thing should be inside the code and not outside.
Exactly.
So I didn't realize it, but at the time I was slowly realizing the importance of annotations. This set me on the path later to work on annotations. But at the time I just thought, how can I do this? And I created this EJBDoclet, which was using JavaDoc comments, where you this time, whenever you need to refer to a method in your Java code, you just put that comment on top of the method. And so if later that method gets renamed, everything is still going to keep working. So you're attaching things together that need to be attached together. And so based on that, you generate the descriptors and all that. So EJBGen, by the way, Doclet was different thing. EJBGen was the name of the thing that I created. Ended up being very, very popular in the EJB world, and people started using it a lot.
Yeah, and huge impact, huge impact. So I was, I was in Germany in enterprise projects, and so Cedric, who he created it solves lots of problems. It's called EJBGen, as you mentioned, because XDoclet was a different thing. And what I wanted to ask you, what was the relation between EJBGen and XDoclet? So I mean, they were obviously very, very similar. So.
Yeah, so EJBGen, I believe was first, I think.
Yeah, it was.
And XDoclet take my idea to the next level, where they thought, well, this idea of using JavaDoc to put annotations basically inside JavaDoc is pretty powerful, and why would it be limited to just EJBs?
Yeah.
So they decided to create this framework where you could create these annotations and then generate all kind of XML, not just for EJB. So they just took my idea, which was an implementation for a very specific purpose, and they made it a lot more universal.
Okay.
And then from that, they started creating all kinds of tools, and the community also started creating all kinds of tools based on XDoclet that were doing basically the same thing as EJBGen was doing, but for other things. For example, for web servers, for databases and things like that.
Everything. And the funny fact is, at the end, we use XDoclet to generate WebLogic specific descriptors, even. So back then, but you were not involved in XDoclet, so there were no relation to the project.
No, not at all. I talked a lot to the authors. I forget their names, unfortunately.
Okay.
But we exchanged a lot of ideas, of course, and we were sharing a lot of emails and things like that.
Oh, nice. But my impression is that actually the XDoclet was the first idea to annotations, right? Because if you look at the EJB3 annotations, they are very, very similar to the XDoclet doclets. I mean, the naming, it was the migration from XDoclet to EJB3 was simple.
I think EJB3 was more influenced by Hibernate and everything that came, because this is when Gavin came on board of the EJB. I was part of the EJB committee as well, and Gavin came on board for EJB3, and he helped us design JPA all the persistence. Yeah.
But I mean, EJB3 is, also the stateless EJB is what I meant. So if the XDoclet, they said this is like attribute-oriented programming. This is what they referred to, and to put metadata, and then annotations came in, which were similar concept, but was implemented with compiler in a type-safe manner, so it was easier. And the last thing is the XDoclet was really well supported in Eclipse, so there was even auto-completion at the end, so you could even control space, and get auto-completed all the metadata.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
So were you the only author of EJBGen?
Yeah, pretty much. And since I wrote it as part of my I ended up writing it on my own, but it ended up being used by BEA and by WebLogic. When I left BEA, I think BEA retained the rights on EJBGen, so I could no longer work on it after I was gone from BEA.
Oh, okay. But there's also one, this back then, it was a huge achievement, right? So, or I would say it had a huge impact on the community. It changed it changed everything, because the observation that the metadata should be in the near of the code and not separated. This was actually the new wave of Java applications, combined with the idea from Ruby on Rails, right? Convention of a configuration.
Yes, that's my read, but I don't want to give myself too much importance here. I don't really know exactly the impact since that it had, but it did lead to the idea that annotation should become part of Java.
Yeah.
And that led to Josh Block reaching out to me and telling me to join the JSR, the JCP actually that was created to add annotations to Java. So I joined this committee, and obviously I had a lot of experience and ideas and thoughts about what annotation should be inside the Java language. And so I think it took us a little bit under a year to come up with the spec of annotations that we're using today. Mm-hmm. And again, it was a great work, very interesting to see all the constraints that we had to operate with, all the various syntaxes that we were thinking of. We looked at .NET and the kind of annotation they were using, and we ended up settling on something that was a good blend of the .NET annotations and something that would match the Java culture as well, and that would also enable some of the existing projects to be very, very successful. So.
Okay, nice. And you still worked for WebLogic back then?
No, I had switched to Google then.
Ah, okay. And when you started with TestNG, it was also interesting, project.
Yeah. So I started TestNG at the end of BA, and by the time I joined Google, I had worked on TestNG for about a year, and I released TestNG 1.0 on the year that I joined Google, so it was 2004.
Why you started
with TestNG? But I had already started working in 2003 or so, because I had already started feeling the pain in my work at WebLogic that JUnit was just not up to the task. And,
okay.
We were trying to do some pretty sophisticated testing scenarios for WebLogic that required a lot of end-to-end testing, functional testing. We needed performance, we needed parallelism, we needed test groups, and JUnit was completely useless at any of these things. So I started working on TestNG at the end of BA, and then in 2004, when I joined Google, it's the same year. I don't think it's the exact same month, but on the same year, I released TestNG, so 2004.
Okay. Back to WebLogic. I was a huge WebLogic fan. So back then, WebLogic was revolutionary, but not from, I would say, from the scalability and performance, also great, but developer friendliness. This is what I really liked. There's a WebLogic jar. And there was one WebLogic client. It also was. It started very quickly. I'm just referring until WebLogic 8. After 8, everything went worse and worse and worse, and it was slower and slower. But until WebLogic 8, it was great. And they had concepts like the nice JMX integration. They had already a console. You could script everything with Python, so you can automate everything. So the administration interface, with the charts where you could look at the how the queue behaves, the incoming queues and the requests, what's going on in the server. It was really, really good. And then they overloaded WebLogic with features, which was somehow beginning of the end. This was my impression, right? So I never understood why that happened,
Yeah, they started building on top of WebLogic, right? They started creating WebLogic integration and WL, a bunch of WL family things. But I think what you saw in WebLogic was just a manifestation of the fact that it was a small team of engineers who are really passionate about what they're doing. And this usually yields good results. And at the time, we were competing against IBM and WebSphere. And there was this feeling of these being the rebels, right? The small band of scrappy rebels who are fighting against the giant IBM and WebSphere. And we're sometimes a bit too cocky also. We're very often underestimating the IBM people. They were very good at what they were doing, but they also came with a lot more weight, a lot more heaviness that's characterized IBM at the time. So I think that was an asset for a little while. But it's just hard to fight against giants. And little by little, WebSphere caught up and got better, and they were better at marketing also, and getting into accounts. And overall, we were pretty sure that we were going to slaughter them, but that never happened.
Okay. So from back then, I have to admit, the popularity of WebLogic was as good as IBM, I would say, if not better. From in Europe, and it was of course faster, and easier to work with. The WebSphere was always a little bit heavyweight, I would say. Now it's changed with OpenLiberty. I don't know whether you are aware. There's OpenLiberty server, which is great. It is like it's called WebSphere Liberty, and it starts in a second or 1.5 seconds and comes with very little memory consumption, 20 megs or something. So this is the new WebSphere, completely rewritten 5 years ago or something like this. Or not rewritten. It is a complete new project, actually. Okay. So, and the TestNG solved some problems because you had test groups and parallelism and stuff like that, right? This was the motivation about TestNG.
Yes. Parallelism, test groups were really things that I feel very strongly about. I also felt very strongly about dependent tests, which even today are still controversial. It's really funny, and I still stand by the fact that for end-to-end testing, it's important to have tests that depend on each other. Yeah. I've talked a lot about this, not going to go too deep into that. So I implemented these things. And what else was there? Well, annotation also. It was annotation driven from the get-go. There was no reflection, obviously. TestNG was just the confluence of several ideas that I had been working on for the past years, right? It was end-to-end testing, it was annotations, and all these other things, and they just crystallized in my head. And sometimes at some point I thought, well, I think I have a pretty good idea what a testing framework could look like now. And I put all this together. I released it. And to be honest, I had really no expectation. My goal here was just to explore and to show the JUnit team, which JUnit had been stagnant for 4 or 5 years. Nobody was working on it anymore. But I just wanted to do a demonstration of this is what modern Java could look like, and this is what a modern testing framework could look like. And my point was just, here it is, I put it out there, and then I move on. But what happened is actually a lot of people started adopting it. And so I ended up being pulled back into TestNG and asked to add more features and more features and more features. And it became a lot more successful than I had anticipated. And even today, I'm still working on it, although I'm mostly doing code reviews and releases and things like that. I'm not writing the code on TestNG anymore. I have 2 who are fantastic developers who've taken over, who are driving TestNG. Their name is Julien Ayer and Krishna Mahadev, and they are the ones. They're the heart of TestNG. But I'm still involved, and I'm still reading the mailing list and making releases today, 17 years later now.
Yes, actually, that was a great feeling, right? But but I assume you're no more working on EJBGen, right? This is
yes. As I mentioned, I started working on EJBGen a while ago.
Just joking. And you're still using TestNG?
Yes, yeah. Whenever I write some Java or some Kotlin, which I do, I use TestNG. I follow JUnit also, 4 and 5. I know what they're doing, but obviously it's TestNG is the one I'm the most fluent in, so it's my default.
And you're still working at Google right now?
No, I left Google a while ago. I left Google in 2010.
Okay.
I was at Google from 2004 to 2010. And since Google, I've worked at a bunch of companies. I worked at LinkedIn, at Yahoo. I've worked at SmartThings more recently, and right now I'm working at Okta.
Before we cover Okta, what you did at Google, was it, I just read that something with Gmail, right, for Android? Yeah,
so Google, the first year I joined at Adwords, because at the time when you joined Google, you were going to work on Adwords because this is where the money is made.
Okay.
But after a year or so, it was...
Was it Java? Was it still Java?
It was Java, yes. Absolutely.
Interesting, okay.
Google had plenty of Java back then already. So I did this for about a year, but after a year, I decided that I had been doing back-end work for the past 8 years of my life, and I wanted to do something different. So I looked around, and I found that Google had a mobile team. The mobile team, so it was 2005. The mobile team was basically 5 people.
Okay.
So I said, I don't
again, right? Again, small team.
I'm doing the small team thing again. So I thought, well, I don't know the first thing about mobile. I had a cell phone back then, but it was still pretty recent even for me. But I thought, hey, why not? So I asked to transition. And at the time, it was pretty easy to transition across teams at Google. And I think I had gained enough reputation that the VP was okay letting me do this. So I moved to the mobile team, and at the time, yes, we had our staff meetings. We were fitting in a very small meeting room, and we were wondering, okay, what are we going to do? And so we looked at all the projects, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to start the mobile Gmail project. I'm going to see if we can have Gmail on mobile phones. You need to remember that back then, 2005, so there was no Android, no iPhone. The mobile were Nokia, were Motorola, StarTAC, Razer. They had some J2ME on them. J2ME was a nightmare. Always has been a nightmare because there is no real norm. It means that when a phone says it has J2ME on it, you really don't know what it really has. So I had no idea what I was signing up for, but I decided, all right, I'm going to do Gmail. So I started the Gmail team. It was just me. And after a year, we had about 25 people, and we ended up shipping Gmail on these feature phones. We call them feature phone, not smartphones. We were supporting something like 300 different devices, which I think was pretty impressive considering how hard it was to develop on J2ME. And so we got Gmail to work on all these phones, and it was a pretty big success. We immediately had millions of users downloading it and using it. I think we broke some new ground in terms of interface. We were able to replicate close to the conversation interface on these phones that you have on the desktop. Overall, I think the app was working pretty well, but we were extremely limited by a lot of things. By, first of all, the operating system of all these phones. They were all over the place. There were Symbian, there were a bunch of others, weird Linux-based operating systems. By Java itself, which was still not super fast, and especially on these underpowered and with very low memory devices. And J2ME itself, which, like I said, is a nightmare. It was different. So it was very hard to develop. It was very hard to debug. There were no tooling, really, no IDEs. It was really the prehistoric ages. So we shipped that. And then I started working on the next version with the team. And this is around the time where Android was acquired by Google. So Andy Rubin and his team came on board, and Andy reached out to me, and he said, he told me basically what he was doing. Say, hey, I'm building a brand new operating system for mobile phones. So first of all, obviously, we're going to need Gmail, and you kind of know Gmail on mobile. But we're also going to have this operating system written and being implemented in Java. Obviously, you know Java too. So basically, we really need someone like you on board.
Paradise again, right?
I'm sorry?
Paradise again.
Yeah, again, yes. Yeah, that's the story of my life. Now, being in the right place and being very lucky. So, of course, I didn't need to be convinced. This is the dream of any engineer, right? You get to write an operating system from scratch. That kind of opportunity only arises once a year, once a lifetime. So, of course, I signed up right away. I left the Gmail team, and I joined this small team of 10 people. I think at the time there were maybe... So mostly Andy's team and 2 or 3 existing Google engineers, and there was just the 10 of us starting Android, and we started building everything. So this is when my Android journey started.
And what do you built on Android? So the Gmail or operating system? The
actual everything. At the time, we needed both, right? So I was involved in everything. I couldn't write Gmail because there was no UI. There was not even the processes. There was nothing in the operating system. So we were building Gmail and the other apps, also Calendar and others, in lockstep with the operating system. And very often we would hit a wall and say, hey, the operating system doesn't have that. So we go to the system team and we tell them, we need this feature. We need to be able to spawn a process. We need to be able to have inter-process communication, all these things. And so they built it for us. And also we assist. We give them feature requests and the guidance and all that. So we did everything. So in the first year, I was involved in a lot of different things. And then as the team grew, and it grew very, very quickly, then I started becoming more narrowly involved in just Gmail.
Okay. And how big was the operating system team? Also 10 people? Or 10 people altogether?
Yes. When it started, it was half then 10, right? Because there were other people who were doing other things. So
interesting.
Yeah, it was 4 or 5 people. The names I have in mind are, I can count them on one hand.
And how important was the project at Google? Was it the most important project, or something like no one noticed, or what was the spirit in the team?
It was extremely strategic for Larry. Larry was especially the one who was sponsoring it very, very heavily. He really wanted to break the stranglehold that operators had. By the way, again, Apple was not in the picture yet.
Yeah,
they hadn't. The iPhone was not around. They were just rumors at the time. So at the time, Larry just wanted to make sure that users were in power. And they felt that users were at the mercy of carriers. They had to pay these crazy subscription fees. They were getting crappy phones, locked phones. They were locked to the SIM card or to their carrier, and they had plenty of things. And he was really not happy about that. And he saw an opportunity for Google to do something, first of all, nice for users, but also potentially expand the business as well. So this is why the acquisition of Android happened. So it was very strategic, but it was also extremely secretive. And that was a big shift from Google. Until then, at Google, all the projects were all transparent. As a Google employee, you had access to everything. You could go to a central website internally and take a look at all the projects, see what they're doing. But Android was the first to curb that trend. We were extremely private. We had our own building. We had our own access badge that Google employees could not access. We were not allowed to talk about Android. We were asked to hide our phones. But of course, the word started spreading across Google that we're building a phone. And so we had this TGIF where Larry, Sergey, and Eric would go on stage every Friday and they answer candidly questions from anyone, really. And the number of questions about, are we building a phone? Or what is Android? Or what's going on? We're getting more and more frequent. And every time they had to dodge and not really answer. So that part was a bit awkward. I think they decided it was important to keep it a secret because there were other forces at work that they could not really disclose. But so that was a bit odd for me as a former Googler. But for someone coming from Android, they probably thought, well, it's business as usual. It's not uncommon for a company to have secret projects that are hidden from everyone else.
It could be even some additional motivation, right? We have something special and building something cool. So why not? Yeah. Interesting. So why you left Google? So you wanted to do something else than operating systems?
Yes, it's a part of it. I think another part was I felt that I was getting comfortable. And as much as being comfortable feels nice, it's really a feeling that throughout my life I've tried to fight and not to fall too far into my comfort zone. I felt that I could have retired at Google. I could have spent the next 20 years of my life at Google and be perfectly happy. And that was definitely an outcome that I contemplated for quite a bit. But I also felt that I had a bit of fire still in me and I wanted to discover new things. And more importantly, I wanted to experience a startup. By then, I had been in Silicon Valley for 12 years or so, and I had always been at big companies. And of course, the startup culture is everywhere here. And I thought, I'd like to try this. And it would be a bit sad if I finished my career in the Bay Area and I never went to a startup. So my goal was I need to quit Google and I need to find a way to have a startup experience in some way. I ended up joining LinkedIn, so not quite a startup, but at the time LinkedIn was 500 people. It was 1 year before the IPO. So it was definitely a much more scaled down version of Google, basically. This is where Google was 10 years prior to that. So I got this reduction in scale, but it wasn't yet the startup experience. But LinkedIn interested me because I felt that they were also on a hypergrowth curve and they were about to have to revamp their infrastructure and be able to meet a 10x, if not 100x growth. And I found this extremely interesting. I felt that I could have a role in inventing these tools at LinkedIn, which at Google are handed to you. At Google, when you want to start a project, they're already telling you, you're going to use this for your backend, this for your database, this for your clustering and all that. So you have a lot of things that are lined up for you, which is fantastic for acceleration, right? You can get to work right away. But by the same token, it feels a bit like you're not really building your own thing. And I felt at LinkedIn where I would get a chance to build these tools from scratch and invent them myself.
Yeah, I have to admit, for me, it is really hard to know to work with a tool without knowing what the tool exactly does. So it's way easier to learn something from scratch, then understand and then use the tool, right? So it could be hard to get all the tools and just compose things together.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So that was a big part of the appeal for me.
So and LinkedIn. So what you did at LinkedIn? So you started Kafka, no? This would be the perfect, the perfect story, started Android, then Kafka, then I was curious about the next company. So what was the job at LinkedIn?
But I did work quite a bit with the person who created Kafka. No, so when I joined LinkedIn, they basically told me, so we're just starting an Android team. Do you want to run it? And I said, hell no.
Okay.
Absolutely not. I'm leaving Google so I can do something else than Android. So what else can I do? So I ended up doing a lot of backend and infrastructure also. This time I switched a bit more toward infrastructure and building these tools that now had a pretty good idea how Google did things. And I wanted to adapt this to the LinkedIn culture and try to help them grow with all the pains that they were having through. Because like I said, they were going through an hypergrowth phase and this is always painful. Regardless of how you tackle it, it's always painful. Infrastructure can fall under its own weight. Engineers can become unhappy. And LinkedIn was at a pretty critical point in its history there. So we had to negotiate that curve very, very quickly.
What you built it? Which tools? What was it?
They were all internal tools to help mostly supervision and also introspection into some of the data we had.
Okay.
I also helped quite a bit in managing the way we were doing branching and merging and all that. LinkedIn had a very, very complicated way of doing things, and me coming with my Google background, I was able to show some of the better ways to do this.
So And after LinkedIn, there was a couple of other startups, right? You mentioned.
Yeah. So I left LinkedIn after about a year and a half because I finally got a chance to do a real startup. I was reached out to by one of my former Google colleagues who had just created a company with a friend of his. So he was CTO, his friend was CEO, and they needed just starter employees. And so I joined as employee number 2. So we were just 4 people, and I got to do a full startup experience. And at first, it was just the 4 of us in a tiny Palo Alto office with no heat, and basically building everything from scratch. And I worked there for a couple of years, and I got to do pretty much everything that I wanted in a startup, where you need to create everything. And whenever there is a problem, if you don't solve it, nobody else will. So you need to solve it yourself.
And what you built there? So roughly?
So we built a product which I thought was very interesting, which of course didn't end up succeeding, although we later got acquired by LinkedIn 2 years later.
Okay.
But that's separate. The product wasn't really a success. But the idea was that it was a calendar assistant. It was an assistant that would go through your calendar, see all the people that you're meeting, and fetch a profile on all these people, so that by the time you sit down with them, assuming you don't know them, so it's for people who meet a lot of new people, but by the time you sit down with them, you receive an email telling you everything you need to know about that person that has been gathered from all kind of social networks and all kind of sources. So if they have, a public Facebook, for example, we would just crawl their Facebook and we can see, they were on vacation in Germany last week, or they just had a baby, or they just went, swimming somewhere, or something like that. Or we can gather information about their education. They went to this college, and by the way, your friend also went to that college. So we're doing all kinds of smart things to try to correlate, so that by the time you meet that person, you have a very good idea of what they are, what they did, and you have a good way to interact with them and get to know them better.
So it's very much like Persona at Sun Microsystems, right?
Pretty much, yes.
Yes, but this time it was a little bit faster. Okay, and right after that, Okta, right?
No, there were a couple of other companies in between. I went to Yahoo in between, and another, I worked for a Chinese company for a while as well. I was an architect at Yahoo for a couple of years, and at the Chinese company, I was a VP, and then Smart Things, and then Okta. I don't think we need to go through. You can pick whatever feels interesting to you, but it's.
What's interesting is Yahoo still. Yahoo is unusual. So, what you did at Yahoo? Java still?
Yeah. So at Yahoo, I was an architect. So I was writing less code on my day job. I write code mostly on my spare time at night and weekends, but I haven't written code in my day job for a while. I think Yahoo must have been the first company where I stopped writing code on a daily basis. But I was still very involved. I was an architect there, and the architects have a very special role in Yahoo, where they interact with a lot of teams and try to help them and guide them toward good practices, sharing information, helping them debug, helping them performance problems, looking at metrics and data and crash rates, and figuring out hard problems and things like that.
So firefighter, basically, right?
I'm sorry?
Firefighter role. So to fix
yeah, exactly. I think firefighter is a good way to tell them. Basically, whenever a team is in trouble and is having a hard time with a specific thing, then you dispatch an architect to work with them for several weeks, sit down with them and go through them and help them through these pains.
Okay.
So it was kind of new, also a new kind of job for me, which is why I was interested in it, because I got to interact with all the teams. So it was mobile. But I got to interact with all the teams that were writing mobile apps at Yahoo, and people don't realize this, but at the time, Yahoo had about 60 different mobile apps, half on Android, half on iOS.
Okay.
People know the most famous ones, the stock, maybe the fantasy league, the weather, the news, and things like that. But they have tons of applications with tens of millions of monthly active users.
Okay.
It's a tremendous amount of money and circulation. So all these teams, a lot of them were just very separated and isolated. And so there was not a lot of cohesion at the time when I joined, even though Marissa was trying to fix that. So at the time, they were all doing their development in their own corner. And so architects were the kind of the glue that allowed all these little teams to be able to participate and contribute and talk to each other more.
Interesting. So now what interests me the most is Okta, of course. So now it's your current job. So what is Okta?
So that's hard. It's hard to explain. I guess for engineers, maybe not so much, but explaining what Okta does on a larger level is harder. But I've come up with a metaphor, with an analogy that I think has been pretty successful. You must be familiar with a single sign-on.
Yeah.
So single sign-on. In a nutshell, for people who are not familiar with what it means, I'm sure everyone has used single sign-on. Maybe they don't know that it's called that. Single sign-on means you log into Gmail, you enter your password, you're in, and then you want to launch Calendar, and you don't have to type your password. You're logged in automatically in Calendar. This is happening thanks to something called single sign-on. And since Google owns the login, once they have identified you as Gmail, they can identify you in some other properties that they own. This is single sign-on. What we're doing at Okta, one of the many things that Okta does is making that more universal, which means we're implementing single sign-on across companies. So what's going to happen now? You want to log in, for example, to GitHub. You first go through Okta. Okta authenticates you and then logs you into GitHub. And now you need to log into Atlassian or Jira, for example, and you go through Okta again. But since Okta just identified you and authenticated you for GitHub, it can log you in automatically to Atlassian. And we do that for hundreds and hundreds of different products and applications. It's basically universal single sign-on.
So
we do a lot of other things, but this is the most, I think, the easiest to describe.
It's a cloud service.
It's a cloud service, yes.
Yeah. Is it a startup again?
Oh, no. It's a big company that went public a few years ago, about 3,000 employees, I think.
Wow,
something like
okay.
that.
I thought, 10 people again, so, and then you are happy,
No,
because it for me, it made a really fresh impression, because what I saw is not evangelists showing code, and the code was to the point and was well done. This is why I became curious about Okta, because there are lots of such solutions, but the Okta examples were lean and to the point. So what I look at was OpenID Connect and single sign-on. This is also what I need for my apps, and there are not many such providers. I mean, I don't know whether you're aware of Keycloak. It's like the implementation which is based on JBoss. There's another one, ForgeRock, which runs on is also a Java-based solution, and Okta made me just curious what it is. So, do developer has to create an account in Okta, or how this works, or what is?
No, yeah. So this particular service that I just described is really for end users and employees, mostly employees right now. So. The way I got exposed to Okta is that the company before Okta, SmartThings, Samsung, was using Okta. And so the way it works is, like I said, you want to log into GitHub, you go to your Okta dashboard, and your Okta dashboard is showing you all the applications that your company is using. You see the one on GitHub, you click on GitHub, you authenticate, you're done. And you'll see GitHub, you see your maybe internal HR, you'll see a bunch of all these apps. And so the pain of logging in is completely gone. And I was so impressed with how fast the login was. You don't need to remember, hundreds of passwords. You don't even need to use a password manager anymore. Right? It's all managed automatically with a lot of interactions. So it's really an end user feature, mostly right now employee feature, but we're also expanding to regular users. So if you know Okta, it's probably through your company right now. And you're just enjoying the fact that you can log in very quickly to all the applications that you use on a daily basis.
Okay, and what do you do at Okta? Are you developing code?
No, I'm a VP of engineering. I'm running an organization that is in charge of what we call devices. And devices are basically iOS, Android, Windows, and macOS applications.
Okay, nice. And is still Java going on at Okta, or is Java less company?
Java, Kotlin, Swift, C#. We need all of these languages, right, to cover all these operating systems.
Yeah, this is the client side.
Yeah.
But backend is also Java?
The backend is Java. Yeah, backend is 100% Java.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. It was really nice to cover lots of Java history with you. And what I will do is to invite you back, I don't know, this year, later, and talk about Okta, whatever you like. If there are some topics around, we could just do it.
We can talk a bit tech also and languages and things like that, which I know you're interested in as well.
Yeah, perfect. So where people can find you on the internet?
Well, I'm not super active on Twitter. They can just look at my name. I have my blog is still out there on the bust.com, bust.com.
Your blog, you name it Otaku. Why?
At the time when I created it, I was studying Japanese, and it felt pretty relevant for me to call myself an otaku because I'm a big nerd, not just in computing and computer science and writing code, but I'm a big nerd in a lot of other topics. And whenever I like something, I tend to be very, very deeply involved in it. So I think that term captured me pretty well.
Perfect. So, and the next time I would really love to talk with you about, your emulator and your gaming experiences as well.
Okay, that sounds great. I look forward to it.
So thank you a lot, and keep exploring. This is what I can tell you, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Adam. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Bye.
Bye.